in Atlanta.
Across the UK.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. Up All Night.
With Dotun Adebayo.
Those are the sounds of Mama Africa, the South African songbird Miriam Makeba, performing at the Coconut Grove in Los Angeles in 1968. And she's the subject of tonight's visit to the Pacifica Radio Archives, one of the oldest public radio collections in the United States. Joanne Griffith joins us from Los Angeles.
Yes, hi Don. You know, it's always a pleasure to be able to just dip into the archive and just do something just because. Obviously, a lot of attention has been turned on South Africa with the ailing health of Makeba, the former South African president and civil rights activist Nelson Mandela. And I just happened to be kind of going through some of the audio that I had and stumbled across some of the material I had of Miriam Makeba. So I thought, why not? So Miriam Makeba was born on March the 4th, 1932. As you said there, she's been nicknamed Mama Africa. She was also a Grammy Award-winning singer and civil rights activist in her own right. A lot of people will actually know Miriam Makeba for the song Pata Pata, which was recorded back in 1957. And she also toured with many folks such as Harry Belafonte, Paul Simon, and her former husband, Hugh Masekela. Well, joining us tonight to talk more about Mama Africa is Austin Okigbo. He's a professor of ethnomusicology at the University of University of Colorado at Boulder. Good evening to you, Austin.
Good evening, nice to be with you.
Thank you so much. Now, as I said, in the UK, most people know Miriam Makeba for her song Pata Pata, but her work and her career stretched so much further than that particular song, didn't it?
Yes, of course.
And what were some of the other songs that she did?
She has a number of other songs, including Oyatela, Okozo, Ngoma Kurila, Bajabula, just Maibuye, Africa, many of which are centered around folk songs drawn from her closer background, and many of which she also that are centered around her political ideology. And
I think I'm going to give you a high five for getting the Xhosa click in there too. That's very difficult to do.
Thank you very much.
You just kind of slid it in there like, oh yeah, no big thing. I practiced, I can't do it, I'm not even going to try it, so we will move on.
That's all right.
Now, how did Miriam Makeba actually discover her talent for singing?
Well, like many or most South African musicians, Miriam Makeba's musical journey actually began in her high school by singing in the high school choir at Kilmerton Institute in Pretoria. But her actual musical career at the professional level began in the Shebeen in Soweto, which is from where she gained a little bit of popularity and was discovered by the Manhattan Brothers, which is a South African jazz group, with whom she performed a little bit before breaking out to form her own all-female group, the Skylarks, and with him she released the album that put her on the map in 1956, the Pata Pata, and from which then leading to her featuring in the film Come Back Africa, that was the anti-apartheid documentary. Her career goes back to her childhood days as a high school student.
And for those that don't know, a shebeen is kind of like a, I don't know, ramshackle, not quite illegal, not quite legal, kind of speakeasy, I guess.
Yeah.
So not a bad place to start at all. Now, you mentioned there about the anti-apartheid documentary that Miriam Makeba was involved in back in 1959. It was one called Come Back Africa. During that time, she actually attended the Venice Film Festival, and she was subsequently banned from returning home to South Africa. How did this impact her life, to not be able to go home?
Well, first of all, bear in mind that she attended the Venice Film Festival, particularly for the Critics Award on the film in which she featured. So this marked the beginning of her international tours as an artist, and which provided her the platform to speak out against apartheid, for which reason her passport was revoked in 1960, followed by the government stripping her of her citizenship after she made a representation that was against the apartheid system at the United Nations in 1963. Now, while all of these made her famous and boosted her career internationally, it affected her adversely at a personal level when she could not attend her mother's funeral in 1960. Nor was she able to return the remains of her daughter Bongi to South Africa when she died in 1985. Now, think about it, having to deal with the death of the two most important people in her life in this manner from exile, I would imagine left lasting psychological impact on her.
Absolutely. I mean, her life as a civil rights activist, you know, why do you think, you know, bearing her recordings and, you know, kind of conversations and writings on Miriam Makeba, why was it that she felt such a need to be an activist in that way? You know, she had a beautiful voice, you know, a successful career overseas. Why is it that she felt that she had to be involved in the movement to end apartheid in South Africa, do you think?
Well, first of all, if you think about her background, as a young person growing up in South Africa at the time, Makeba had first-hand experience of the oppressive condition of black people. Unfortunately, not many people had that kind of sharp political consciousness. You'll be surprised to know that she spent 6 months in jail when she was 18 months with her mother, who was imprisoned for brewing the Zulu, the indigenous Nguni beer, Komboti. And it is more likely, I think, that her political consciousness became sharpened by the time she participated in that anti-apartheid film documentary, Come Back Africa, and sequel to which she began to channel her musical talent to drawing attention to the injustices of the apartheid system. You know, if you think about it, once she found herself on the international stage, it seems as if some of the news that had been muted, sometimes when you are in the system, you can't even quite understand the adversity, the intensity of the oppressive system. But when looking at it from the outside made more sense to her. And the events of her international exposure kind of contributed to her becoming more involved and channeling her music to that cause.
Well, let's take a listen to the lady herself. Here is Miriam Makeba speaking during a special Pacifica Radio National broadcast hosted by Roscoe and featuring Hugh Masekela and Reverend Bosak back in 1987. Now, in this clip, we hear Miriam Makeba discussing the cultural boycott against South Africa during apartheid.
That's one thing I fought. I said, why take the victims of apartheid and victimize them? The anti-apartheid groups, they say they have a feeling that when our artists have to come from South Africa, they must get permission from them. I mean, that's what I was saying. Help us, but don't lead us. Why would a South African artist have to ask somebody who is out here, like you always say, living in a penthouse, never from Crossroads at home or Soweto, ask this penthouse person, may I come out to come and give my culture to the people outside in the world? It's wrong. And then Paul Simon, he went to South Africa, he recorded 2 or 3 songs, took the very artists he recorded with, brought them out here and exposed them. And none of them are singing Baby I Love You. They are singing about the lives of the people at home, which the media cannot bring out here again because of the blackout of the news from South Africa. And those people, what they were doing, they didn't know they were helping the South African government and this government that does not want anything from South Africa in their living rooms because it makes problems. People started boycotting the companies here that invest in South Africa because of what they were seeing on TV. 1, 2. Some of the artists who were behind ANC and the anti-apartheid groups are the very ones who sent people to South Africa to record South African music and bring it here for them to overdub their voices and make their albums. And I think that's more hypocritical than even Paul, who did go himself. At least he went himself. He saw that he did not perform. And the boycott clause in the UN says, you must not perform. He did not perform publicly, so there's that technicality. He did not do public performances. He refused to even go to Sun City. But someone who does not even go there, who sends somebody to steal, that's theft, to steal the music and bring it. If I have money and I send Hugh to go and record music in South Africa and bring it for me, to put my voice on it, how do I know if Hugh paid those artists that he recorded? He may not have paid them. If he paid them, he may not have paid them what I would have paid them if I want to be fair. And then he brings that music and I put my voice in it and I call myself not having done what Paul Simon did. I think Paul Simon was decent because these people he brought them, he worked with them all over the world, and he shares whatever he has to share with them from head to toe.
A very passionate Miriam Makeba there, speaking back in 1987 about the cultural boycott against South Africa. Our guest tonight is Austin Okigbo. He is a professor of ethnomusicology at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I know that you were sitting there listening to that with interest.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. I mean, kind of pick that apart for us a little bit. Miriam Makeba, they're talking about Paul Simon, the use of South African music, the boycott, the impact it had against musicians. I mean, what impact did it have against musicians such as Miriam?
Well, first of all, the Paul Simon's Graceland album, the controversy and the debate will never end. And it's one of the things we keep debating when it comes to the politics of the music industry. But I think she's making a very relevant point. Depending on where you are, and of course, even within South Africa, how it was received. Some people thought even those who were in support of apartheid at some point would, valued what Paul Simon did as a validation of the so-called policy of separate development. Some others saw it as an exploitation. There are some black people that liked what Paul Simon did. There were some black people that didn't like what he did. There were some white people that liked it, those who supported apartheid, some who supported apartheid that opposed it. I think at the end of the day, that debate will continue. It all speaks to this question of cultural appropriation. But I think one thing we can learn from what she is trying to get us to understand is if for no reason we should appreciate what Paul Simon did, is at least that it brought further exposure to the art and the role of the art in social movements in South Africa, as well as it exposed further what was happening in the system, rather than shutting it off, rather than being quiet and being mute about it. And by not bringing it to the attention of the world, there was no way the global opinion would have come to weigh on the apartheid system in order to bring it to a downfall.
Miriam spent a number of years in the United States. She worked with the likes of Harry Belafonte, himself obviously a civil rights activist here in the US. Musically, how would you say that this time influenced her, and how did she influence those around her?
Well, first of all, let's recall that one of the evils of apartheid is that it culturally isolated both the white and black population of South Africa. Now, the international stage, especially her time in the U.S., afforded Miriam Makeba the exposure to not just the rich musical cultures of the black diaspora, but more so to the musical cultures of other African countries, some of the languages and elements of which she began to incorporate in her singing, thereby enhancing the Pan-African outlook of her music, on account of which she earned herself the title of Mama Africa. Now, for the people around her, such as Harry Belafonte, it afforded them the benefit of experiencing, if you like, firsthand, the stylistics of African music that Miriam Makeba brought with her, as well as to even participate in its production. Now, when you consider the fact that in the 1960s was the era of the Afrocentric Black Power movement, that experience, I believe, was in many ways culturally fulfilling for many of her collaborators, particularly the black diaspora.
You mentioned there the kind of the Black Power movement, Black Panthers. Miriam obviously performed in the United States. She released a number of songs here. She was outlawed, though, in many respects in the US when she married the head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Stokely Carmichael, a.k.a. Kwame Ture. What was the impact of that particular union and the impact on her career?
On the first level, it absolutely slowed down her musical career. But I would say that became somewhat of a blessing in disguise, because moving with Carmichael to Ahmed Sékou Touré's Guinea, who, by the way, was a very good promoter of arts, a patron of arts, it ushered in a new phase in her life of her musical and political activism. So if you will remember that also she was appointed Guinea's official delegate to the United Nations. And the job she did on account of which she also won the Dag Hammarskjöld's Peace Prize in 1986 at the United Nations. So yeah, it may have momentarily slowed down her musical career, but it contributed to also boosting her role in bringing and educating the world about what was happening in South Africa in the long run.
And again, kind of garnering that title of much deserved of Mama Africa. Now,
yes.
Eventually, Miriam Makeba was allowed to return back to South Africa. How was she received when she was able to finally return home?
Oh yeah, she has. I think besides Nelson Mandela, and I don't know of any other person in South Africa that is well respected, that was ever well received, because Miriam Makeba is a cultural icon. There are many, South Africa produced many musicians, many of whom were in exile just like Miriam Makeba, but none ever enjoyed the kind of warmth and national reception that she enjoys. She's very well beloved.
She passed in 2008.
Yes.
And it's funny, I actually kind of sat down, I was listening to radio, and I remember kind of hearing, and we heard all over the radio, everyone played Pata Pata, which was, kind of think there's loads of songs that she sang. Why just that one? What for you, though, is the legacy that Miriam Makeba has left, not just in South Africa, but as you mentioned, in that kind of Pan-African musical movement?
Yeah, I would say that she has her legacy. I would say is twofold. First, these days we talk about world music, world beat, multicultural music education. Now, what we hear in world beat today mirrors pretty much the stylistics that was innovated by Miriam Makeba, by the very fact that she let African folk songs assume centrality in her repertoire. Now, for this reason, I don't see any, and as an ethnomusicologist, I don't see any other African artist whose music is as accessible as Makeba's when you think about reading African music as cultural and or historical transcript. Secondly, she laid down a form of music that comprised an intersection of cultural and political activism that has not been rivaled by any other musician from the continent, not even Fela Kuti of Nigeria, in all his talent and outspokenness. So I put her legacy on in that twofold. In terms of her music, in terms of her activism, there's none that is as accessible. There's none that is I don't see any other that has rivaled her.
As an ethnic musicologist, and we're going to, play out with a little bit of Miriam Makeba, because why? Because you can. But as an ethnomusicologist, how kind of as you teach the academics of music and African music in particular, is there an understanding of what Miriam Makeba really brought to the table musically? How is she digested today?
Interestingly, I can't recall how many people really spend time teaching Miriam Makeba in the class. I spend time teaching Miriam Makeba because I teach a class on African popular music and African music and politics in Africa. There's two different separate courses, and she features prominently in my classes. But when you see textbooks and world music, and particularly world popular music, she's very well represented. What I cannot attest to is the extent to which students have begun to appreciate her as much as they're appreciating some other musicians like Fela Kuti. I think part of the reason is a lot of people tend to teach Fela because of the jazz, strong jazz presence in his music. But when it comes to multicultural music education, and an area I personally have been pushing when it comes to music education, multicultural music education, Miriam Makeba is a lot more accessible with regards to learning African music as a means of understanding African culture and African political history more than any other African musician.
Well, maybe people will be able to get into a bit more Miriam Makeba if someone did a Broadway show a la Fela Kuti. But Austin Okigbo, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Austin Okigbo, he's a professor of ethnomusicology at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And it seems wrong not to finish the show with a little bit of Mama Africa singing the click song.
Our next song also comes from South Africa. This time it comes from the Transkei. And it's a Xhosa wedding song. Xhosa is my native language. Back home, those who do not speak Xhosa call the song the click song, simply because they find it rather difficult saying uqongqothwane. Igqirha lendlela ke nguqongqothwane.
Yeah, many thanks to Joanne Griffith. I interviewed Miriam Makeba when she had her book, My Life, My Story out. Serious Woman at the Dorchester Hotel many years ago.